The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Copper Creek as Josephine Lee stumbled forward, her hands bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. The crowd that had gathered for the impromptu auction jeered and shouted obscenities, their faces twisted with cruel delight at her public humiliation. At 22, she had never imagined she would end up here being sold like livestock in a frontier town after being falsely accused of theft by the most powerful man in the territory. $2 for the thieving wench, a red-faced man shouted from the crowd. $1.50, another countered, laughing. And that's being generous for damaged goods. Josephine kept her eyes fixed on the ground, refusing to let them see her tears. Her once fine blue dress was now torn and dirty, her dark hair falling in tangled waves around her face. Only 3 weeks ago, she'd been working as a seamstress at Mrs. Whitmore's shop, saving every penny to someday open her own dress shop. Now, she was property to be bartered for. Going once for $3, the town deputy announced, clearly enjoying his role in this spectacle. Going twice, $500. The crowd fell silent, heads turning toward the deep voice that had called out the outrageous sum. Josephine finally looked up, her eyes finding a tall figure at the back of the gathering. He stepped forward, and the crowd parted before him like water around a stone. He wore a black Stetson pulled low over his eyes, a leather vest over a worn cotton shirt, and chaps that had seen better days. 2 revolvers hung from his belt, and the spurs on his boots jingled softly as he approached. When he reached the front of the crowd, he removed his hat, revealing sandy blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that held no room for argument. "I said $500, he repeated, his voice steady and commanding. The deputy stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Austin Hayes, you can't be serious. She's priceless," Austin interrupted, his gaze moving to Josephine's face. "But $500 is all the cash I'm carrying." He reached into his vest and pulled out a stack of bills, counting them out into the deputy's trembling hand. The man had never seen so much money paid for anything in Copper Creek, let alone for a woman accused of theft. "She's yours then," the deputy stammered, pocketing the money quickly. "Though I can't imagine why you'd waste good money on her." Austin didn't respond. Instead, he approached Josephine, who looked up at him with a mixture of fear and cautious hope. Without a word, he cut the ropes binding her wrists with a knife from his belt. Her skin was raw and bleeding where the rough hemp had rubbed it. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly, his voice gentler than it had been when addressing the crowd. Josephine nodded, though her legs felt weak beneath her. "Yes," she whispered. "Then let's go. My horse is at the end of the street." As they walked away, the crowd began to disperse, muttering about the foolishness of cowboys with too much money. Josephine kept her head high, though every step was an effort. She had no idea who this man was or what he wanted with her, but anything seemed better than the fate that had awaited her moments before. Austin's horse was a magnificent Palomino stallion, its coat gleaming in the harsh sunlight. He helped her mount before swinging up behind her, his chest warm against her back as he reached around her to take the reins. "Hold on," he instructed, and she gripped the saddle horn as the horse broke into a trot, then a gallop, carrying them away from Copper Creek and the nightmare she had endured there. They rode for what seemed like hours, the landscape changing from the dusty streets of town to rolling plains dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. The relentless sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Finally, Austin slowed the horse to a walk as they approached a small cabin nestled against a hillside with a corral and barn nearby. "This is my place," he said as he dismounted and reached up to help her down. "It's not much, but it's home." Josephine's legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground, and Austin caught her by the elbows to steady her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, a man who spent his days squinting against the sun. "Why?" she asked, finding her voice at last. "Why would you pay so much for me?" Austin looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Because no person should be sold for pennies," he finally replied. "Or sold at all, for that matter. But you don't know me. You don't know what they say I did." "I know enough," he said simply. Come inside. You need to rest and eat something. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly neat, with a stone fireplace along one wall, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A trunk stood at the foot of the bed, and shelves lined another wall, holding books, a few dishes, and various supplies. Sit, Austin said, gesturing to one of the chairs. I'll make some coffee and heat up some stew. Josephine sat, watching as he moved around the small space with practiced efficiency, stirring the embers in the fireplace and hanging a pot over the flames. There was something comforting about his quiet confidence, the way he seemed perfectly at ease with himself and his surroundings. My name is Josephine Lee, she offered after a while, though I suppose you already know that from the auction. Austin Hayes, he replied, glancing over his shoulder at her. Most folks just call me Hayes. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, for what you did, he shrugged, turning his attention back to the stew. Don't thank me yet. You don't know what kind of man I am. You can't be worse than the men in Copper Creek, she said softly. Austin's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Maybe not, he conceded. But I'm no saint, Miss Lee. Please call me Josephine. He nodded, filling a bowl with the steaming stew and placing it before her along with a spoon and a chunk of bread. Eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. It was true. Since her arrest 4 days ago, she had been given only scraps barely enough to keep her alive. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger as the rich flavors of the beef stew filled her mouth. Austin sat across from her with his own bowl, watching her with those intense blue eyes. Tomorrow, he said between bites, I'll take you wherever you want to go. St. Louis, Denver, San Francisco, name it, and I'll see you safely there. Josephine paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. You're letting me go? Did you think I was keeping you? He looked genuinely surprised. I bought your freedom, Josephine, not you. For the first time in days, tears filled her eyes not from fear or humiliation, but from unexpected gratitude. I don't know where to go, she admitted. I have no family, no money. Everything I owned was in Copper Creek, and I doubt I'll ever see any of it again. Austin considered this as he finished his stew. Then stay here until you figure it out. I have a line camp about 10 miles north where I'll be spending most of my time for the next few weeks, breaking horses for the ranch I work for. You'll have privacy. You would do that for a stranger? I would do that for anyone who needed it, he replied. Then, seeing her exhaustion, he stood and took her empty bowl. You take the bed tonight. I'll sleep in the barn. I couldn't. You can and you will, he interrupted firmly. You need proper rest. There are clean clothes in the trunk that might fit you. They belonged to my sister before she married and moved east. Help yourself. Before she could protest further, he had grabbed a blanket from the bed and headed for the door. Lock this behind me, he instructed. I'll knock 3 times when I return in the morning. Then he was gone, leaving Josephine alone in the quiet cabin. True to his word, she found women's clothing in the trunk, simple dresses, a nightgown, undergarments. She chose the nightgown, then used the water from a pitcher on the washstand to clean away the grime of her ordeal as best she could. As she slipped between the clean sheets of Austin's bed, the events of the day caught up with her. One moment she had been facing a life of servitude or worse, sold to the highest bidder like an animal. The next, she had been rescued by a stranger who asked nothing in return. It seemed too good to be true, and yet here she was. She fell asleep wondering what tomorrow would bring, and whether her mysterious benefactor was truly as honorable as he seemed. True to his word, Austin knocked 3 times the next morning. Josephine had already been awake for some time, dressed in one of the simple calico dresses she had found in the trunk. It was a bit large on her frame, thinned by recent hardship, but clean and whole. Come in, she called, and he entered, carrying a basket of eggs and a canteen of fresh water. Good morning, he greeted her, setting his burdens on the table. I thought you might like some breakfast before I head out. You're leaving? She couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. Just for a few days. Like I said, I have horses to break at the line camp. He began cracking eggs into a pan. There's plenty of food here, and I've drawn water from the well. No one will bother you. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away." Josephine watched as he cooked, noticing the way the morning light caught in his hair, turning it golden. There was a quiet strength about him that she found reassuring. "Mr. Hayes," she began, then corrected herself at his look. "Austin, I don't know how to thank you properly." "You don't need to thank me at all," he replied, sliding the eggs onto 2 plates. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly, "they wouldn't. Not in Copper Creek, at least." He sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "What happened there, if you don't mind my asking? How did you end up at that auction?" Josephine pushed her eggs around her plate. "I was accused of stealing from Mr. Blackburn, the banker. He claimed I took a gold pocket watch from his office when I delivered a mended jacket, but I never took anything I wouldn't." "I believe you," Austin said simply. "You do?" She looked up in surprise. "I know Blackburn. He's not an honest man." Austin's jaw tightened. "And he has a reputation for pursuing women who work for him. When they refuse his advances, strange things happen." "That's exactly what occurred," Josephine confirmed, relieved that someone finally believed her. "He offered me a position as his personal seamstress, with living quarters in his home. When I declined, he became angry. The next day, the sheriff arrested me for theft. And with no family or influential friends to speak for you, your word meant nothing against Blackburn's," Austin concluded. "It's an old story in these parts. The judge sentenced me to 6 months in jail, but the jail is overcrowded. The deputy suggested they could recover the town's losses by selling my services instead." She shuddered at the memory. No one even questioned it. Austin's hand tightened around his fork. "Blackburn probably arranged the whole thing. He likely figured he could buy you himself for next to nothing, or have one of his cronies do it." "Then you appeared," Josephine said softly. "Then I appeared," he agreed. He hesitated, then added, "I've been watching Blackburn for some time. He and his associates have been driving small ranchers out of business, stealing land through fraudulent claims. My former employer was one of their victims." "Is that why you intervened? To spite him?" Austin considered the question. "Partly," he admitted, "but mostly because what they were doing to you was wrong, and no one else was going to stop it." They finished their breakfast in companionable silence. Afterward, Austin showed her around the small property, the vegetable garden behind the cabin, the chicken coop, the well, and the barn where he kept feed for his horse and a milk cow. "I should be back in 3 days, 4 at most," he said as he prepared to leave. "If you need anything, Mr. Johnson at the next ranch over is a good man. Just follow the creek east about 5 miles. "I'll be fine," Josephine assured him, though the thought of being alone made her nervous. Austin swung into the saddle, looking down at her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Lock the doors at night. There's a rifle above the fireplace if you need it." "Do you expect trouble?" "No, but it's better to be prepared. Blackburn isn't likely to come looking for you himself, but he has men who do his dirty work." With that sobering thought, he touched the brim of his hat and rode away, leaving Josephine standing in the yard, watching until he disappeared over the ridge. The days passed slowly. Josephine kept herself busy by cleaning the already tidy cabin, tending the garden, and collecting eggs from the henhouse. She found a needle and thread in a drawer and set about altering one of the dresses to fit her better. Grateful for the familiar work that kept her hands occupied and her mind from dwelling too much on her precarious situation. In the evenings, she browsed Austin's small collection of books, surprised to find classics like The Iliad and Paradise Lost among practical manuals on animal husbandry and frontier medicine. She wondered about the man who had rescued her, clearly more educated than the average cowboy, yet choosing this solitary existence on the frontier. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as Josephine was hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 trees, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leapt, thinking Austin had returned, but as the riders came into view, she realized with growing horror that these were strangers, 3 rough-looking men, their expressions predatory as they spotted her. She dropped the wet shirt she was holding and ran for the cabin, reaching the rifle just as the men dismounted in the yard. Her hands trembled as she checked that it was loaded, the way her father had taught her long ago, before consumption had taken both her parents within months of each other. "Come on out, little lady," one of the men called, his voice falsely jovial. "We know you're in there. Mr. Blackburn sent us to bring you back where you belong." Josephine's mouth went dry with fear. She positioned herself by the window, the rifle ready. "Leave now," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Hayes will be back any minute," the men laughed. "Hayes is 10 miles away, breaking broncs," another voice replied, "and we outnumber him anyway. Make this easy on yourself." "I'll shoot the first man who tries to enter," she warned, though the thought of actually pulling the trigger made her stomach clench. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of boots on the porch steps. Josephine aimed the rifle at the door. Her finger on the trigger, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it outside. The door handle turned, then the wood splintered as someone kicked it. Josephine fired, the recoil slamming the rifle butt into her shoulder painfully. A cry of pain told her she had hit her target, and there was a thud as someone fell on the porch. "You shot Hank!" one of the men shouted, outraged. "You'll pay for that, you—" The rest of his threat was drowned out by the thunder of approaching hooves and a shout that made Josephine weak with relief. "Step away from my house," Austin's voice rang out, followed by 2 rapid gunshots. Risking a glance through the window, Josephine saw one of Blackburn's men clutching his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. The other was backing away, hands raised. Austin sat astride his palomino, both revolvers drawn and aimed steady. "Take your friend and go," Austin commanded, nodding toward the man Josephine had shot, who was groaning and clutching his leg on the porch. "Tell Blackburn if he sends anyone else, they won't be leaving alive." The uninjured man helped his bleeding companion onto a horse. Then they hauled the third man, still moaning, onto his mount as well. With venomous glares at Austin, they rode away, leaving a trail of dust and blood behind them. Only when they were out of sight did Austin holster his weapons and dismount. He approached the cabin cautiously. "Josephine, are you all right?" She opened the door, still clutching the rifle, her face pale. "You came back early." "I finished the job sooner than expected," he replied, gently taking the rifle from her trembling hands. "Good thing, too." The reality of what had just happened hit her then, and Josephine's knees gave way. Austin caught her before she could fall, guiding her to a chair. His arms were strong around her, his scent a mixture of leather, horses, and something uniquely him. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice low and reassuring. "You did well, defending yourself." "I shot a man," she whispered, horrified. "You protected yourself from men who meant you harm," Austin corrected. "And you only wounded him. He'll live, unfortunately." Josephine looked up at him, noticing for the first time a bruise forming on his cheekbone. "You're hurt." He touched it absently. "One of the Bronx got in a lucky kick. It's nothing." His expression grew serious. "But this changes things. Blackburn knows where you are now and he won't stop. We need to get you somewhere safer." "Where?" she asked, feeling hopeless. "If he's as powerful as you say, nowhere in the territory will be safe." Austin paced the small room, thinking. "We could head north, to Montana Territory, or west to California, somewhere beyond his reach." "I can't ask you to uproot your life for me," Josephine protested. "You've already done more than enough." He stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "What if I was considering a change anyway? My job with the Carson Ranch is finished now that I've broken their horses. There's nothing holding me here." "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, bewildered by his continued kindness. Austin was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to be at the mercy of men like Blackburn," he finally said, "and because I can't stand by and watch another innocent person destroyed by his greed." There was a story there, Josephine sensed, but Austin's expression made it clear he wasn't ready to share it. Instead, he began gathering supplies, outlining a plan to leave at first light. "We'll head west initially, to throw off any pursuit, then cut north toward Wyoming Territory," he explained as he packed food and ammunition into saddlebags. "I have a friend in Laramie who can help us." Josephine felt overwhelmed by the sudden change in plans, yet strangely exhilarated as well. "I've never been farther west than Copper Creek," she admitted. Austin paused in his preparations to give her a rare smile. "Then you're in for quite an adventure, Miss Lee." That night, despite Austin's protests, Josephine insisted he take the bed while she slept on a pallet by the fire. Neither of them slept much, listening for any sound that might indicate Blackburn's men had returned. When Austin finally did doze off, Josephine found herself watching him in the dying firelight, struck by the way his features softened in sleep, making him look younger and less burdened. She wondered about the life he had led before their paths crossed, about the pain he seemed to carry just beneath his composed exterior. Most of all, she wondered why her heart beat faster whenever he looked at her with those intense blue eyes. They departed before dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten as they rode away from the cabin. Austin had insisted Josephine ride his prized Palomino Thunder while he rode a sturdy bay mare he had brought back from the line camp. "Thunder's faster if you need to make a run for it," he explained when she protested the arrangement, "and he knows me, so he'll follow if we get separated." Josephine had never been comfortable on horseback, but she quickly found that Thunder seemed to sense her nervousness and adjusted his gait to make her feel more secure. Austin rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of knowledge about the terrain they traversed. By midday, they had left the rolling plains behind and entered more rugged country, with rocky outcroppings and stands of pine trees. Austin led them along game trails and shallow creek beds, intentionally making their trail difficult to follow. "Do you think they are behind us?" Josephine asked during a brief rest to water the horses. Austin scanned the horizon with narrowed eyes. "Not yet, but they will be. Blackburn won't let this go easily." "Because of me?" "Partly," he acknowledged, "but also because of me. I've been a thorn in his side for some time, interfering with his plans when I could. Rescuing you was the most public challenge I've made to his authority." "I'm sorry to have brought this trouble on you," she said softly. Austin turned to look at her, his expression softening. "Don't be. Some troubles are worth having." There was something in the way he said it, in the way his eyes lingered on her face, that made Josephine's cheeks warm. She busied herself adjusting Thunder's saddle to hide her confusion. They rode on through the afternoon, the landscape growing increasingly beautiful as they climbed in elevation. Wildflowers carpeted meadows between stands of aspen trees, their leaves trembling in the gentle breeze. Despite the circumstances, Josephine found herself enjoying the journey, seeing parts of the West she had only heard about in stories. As evening approached, Austin led them to a small clearing beside a bubbling stream, sheltered by a circle of pine trees. "We'll camp here for the night," he decided. "Good water, and the trees will hide our fire from anyone looking for us." He helped Josephine dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. She was stiffer than she cared to admit after a full day in the saddle, and she couldn't quite suppress a wince as her feet touched the ground. "Sore?" Austin asked, his voice sympathetic. "A bit," she confessed. "It's been years since I rode a horse." "Walk around a little, it'll help. I'll see to the horses, then start a fire." Josephine did as he suggested, stretching her legs as she gathered fallen branches for firewood. By the time Austin had unsaddled and picketed the horses, she'd collected a respectable pile of wood and was attempting to arrange it for a fire. "Allow me," he said, kneeling beside her. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, arranging the wood in a careful structure, then striking a match to light it. The dry tinder caught quickly, and soon a cheerful blaze was crackling in the gathering dusk. They ate a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and dried apples, sitting side by side against a fallen log. The night was chilly at this elevation, and Josephine found herself inching closer to both the fire and Austin's warmth. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked after a comfortable silence. "My father taught me when I was young," she replied, memories surfacing of happier times. "We lived on a small farm in Missouri then. He said a woman alone should know how to protect herself." "Wise man, your father." "He was." Josephine smiled at the memory. "He taught at the local school during the day and worked our land in the evenings. My mother made the most beautiful quilts you've ever seen. That's where I learned to sew." "What brought you to Colorado Territory?" Her smile faded. After they died, there was nothing left for me in Missouri. The farm went to pay my father's medical debts. I had an aunt in Denver who took me in, taught me dressmaking as a trade. When she passed 2 years ago, I moved to Copper Creek because I heard they needed a seamstress. Austin nodded, understanding in his eyes. Loss has a way of setting our feet on unexpected paths. What about you? Josephine asked, curious about his past. You're educated, I can tell from your books. How did you end up as a cowboy in Colorado? A shadow crossed his face, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, poking at the fire with a stick. I was studying law in Boston. My father was a judge, my grandfather before him. It was expected that I would follow in their footsteps. What happened? The war between the states happened, he said grimly. I enlisted in the Union Army in '63, served until Appomattox, came home to find my father dead from a heart attack and our family fortune gone. He had invested heavily in ventures that collapsed during the war. I'm sorry, Josephine said softly. Austin shrugged. I tried to rebuild, to finish my studies, but the memories. I kept seeing the faces of men I'd killed, hearing the screams of the wounded. He stared into the flames. I couldn't stay. Sold what little was left and headed west, looking for open spaces and clean air. And became a cowboy. It suited me, he said simply. Working with horses, being outdoors, it helped quiet the ghosts. Josephine hesitated, then placed her hand gently on his arm. Thank you for telling me. Austin looked down at her hand, then up at her face, something vulnerable in his expression. We should get some rest, he said after a moment. Tomorrow will be another long day. He insisted she take the single bedroll he had packed, making a crude pallet for himself from saddle blankets on the opposite side of the fire. Josephine protested, but he was adamant. I've slept on worse, he assured her. During the war, a bed of pine needles would have seemed like luxury. Wrapped in the bedroll that smelled faintly of him, Josephine watched the stars through gaps in the tree canopy, thinking about the man sleeping across the fire. He had been nothing but honorable since the moment he had appeared in Copper Creek, yet there was an intensity about him. A carefully controlled power that both intimidated and attracted her. She fell asleep to the soft sounds of his breathing and the gentle chorus of night insects, feeling safer than she had any right to under the circumstances. The next few days fell into a pattern as they traveled steadily northward. They rose with the sun, ate a quick breakfast, and rode until midday, when they would stop briefly to rest the horses and eat something. Then they would continue until evening, making camp in sheltered locations where Austin judged they would be hard to find. Each night, they talked a little more. Austin was not a man of many words, but he was a good listener, and Josephine found herself sharing stories of her childhood, her dreams of someday owning her own dress shop, her love of creating beautiful things from fabric and thread. In return, he told her about his experiences as a cowboy, the characters he had met on cattle drives, the beauty of the untamed West that had helped heal his war-torn spirit. On the fourth day, as they crested a ridge, Josephine gasped at the vista spread before them. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow even in the summer heat. Forests of pines stretched as far as she could see, broken by meadows filled with wildflowers. It's beautiful, she breathed. Austin nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Wyoming territory. We'll reach Laramie in about 2 days if we keep this pace. And your friend will help us there? Daniel Morgan. We served together in the war, came west around the same time. He's the sheriff in Laramie now, honest, unlike some lawmen in these parts. He'll help us figure out our next move. Our next move. The word sent a strange flutter through Josephine's chest. Somehow, in the course of their journey, they had become a we, their fates intertwined. She wasn't sure when it had happened or what it meant for the future, but she found she didn't mind. That night, they camped in a meadow filled with purple and yellow wildflowers, their small fire the only light for miles around. After they had eaten, Austin surprised her by pulling a harmonica from his saddlebag. You play? Josephine asked, delighted. Poorly, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile, but it passes the time. He began to play a slow, melancholy tune that seemed to capture the vastness of the landscape around them, the loneliness and beauty of the frontier. Josephine listened, enchanted, watching the firelight play across his features. When he finished, she applauded softly. "That was lovely," she told him, "not poor at all." "My mother taught me," he said, turning the harmonica over in his hands. "She played beautifully piano mostly, but she could coax a tune from just about anything. This was hers." "She would be proud of you," Josephine said gently. Austin looked up, his eyes reflecting the flames. "I'm not so sure about that. She had higher hopes for me than becoming a drifting cowboy." "You're more than that," Josephine insisted. "You're a good man, Austin Hayes. The kind who pays $500 to save a stranger from injustice. The kind who risks his life to protect others. That's something any mother would be proud of." For a long moment, he just looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then he ducked his head, embarrassed by her praise. "It's getting late," he said gruffly. "We should sleep." But as Josephine settled into her bedroll, she could have sworn she heard him murmur, "Thank you," so quietly it might have been the whispering of the wind through the grass. The next day brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and by midday, a steady rain was falling. Austin pulled oilcloth ponchos from his packs, and they rode hunched beneath them, water streaming from the brims of their hats. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles ahead," Austin shouted over the increasing wind. "We can shelter there until this passes." Josephine nodded, too cold and wet to reply. Thunder plodded steadily forward, seemingly unbothered by the weather, but she was soaked to the skin despite the poncho, her hands numb around the reins. The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a one-room shack with a sagging roof, but it was dry inside, and the stone fireplace was intact. Austin quickly got a fire going while Josephine stood shivering by the door, water pooling around her boots. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Austin said practically, rummaging in his saddlebag. "Here it's not much, but it's dry." He handed her a clean cotton shirt, far too large for her slender frame, and turned his back to give her privacy. Josephine hesitated only briefly before peeling off her sodden dress and undergarments, quickly donning the shirt. It fell to her knees like a nightgown, the sleeves hanging well past her fingertips. "I'm decent," she said when she had finished. Austin turned, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her in his shirt, her hair falling in damp waves around her shoulders. He swallowed visibly, then busied himself hanging her wet clothes near the fire to dry. "You should change too," Josephine pointed out, noticing how his own clothes clung to him. "You'll catch your death otherwise." He nodded, extracting another shirt and a pair of trousers from his pack. This time it was Josephine who turned away, though not before catching a glimpse of his broad shoulders as he pulled off his wet shirt. The sight made her cheeks warm despite the chill in the cabin. "All clear," he said a moment later. The cabin was warming quickly with the fire blazing. Austin spread their bedrolls on the floor near the hearth, then set about making a simple meal from their supplies. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the rain drum on the roof and the wind howl around the eaves. "We'll have to stay here tonight," Austin said, glancing out the small window at the darkening sky. "Storm's getting worse." Josephine nodded, secretly relieved. The thought of going back out into that deluge was unappealing, and there was something cozy about the cabin despite its rustic condition. "Do you think we're still being followed?" Austin considered the question. "Possibly, but not likely in this weather, and the rain will wash away our tracks." "Good," she said with feeling. They spent the evening talking, closer than they had been on previous nights due to the confines of the cabin. Austin told her more about his friend Daniel and the town of Laramie, painting a picture of a growing settlement with opportunities for someone with Josephine's skills. "There's no proper dressmaker there yet," he mentioned, "mostly mail-order clothes or rough-sewn items from the general store. A talented seamstress could do well." Josephine's eyes lit up at the thought. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," he assured her. "The town is growing, with the railroad coming through. There are enough wealthy ranchers' wives and merchants' daughters to keep you busy." It sounds wonderful, she admitted. A fresh start, somewhere Blackburn can't reach. That's the idea, Austin agreed. He hesitated, then added, I have some money saved, enough to help you get established if you decide to stay in Laramie. Josephine shook her head firmly. You've done more than enough for me already. I couldn't possibly accept more money from you. Consider it an investment then, he suggested. You can repay me when your business is thriving. She studied his face in the firelight, trying to understand this man who continued to surprise her with his generosity. Why do you care what happens to me, Austin? Truly. He looked away, into the flames. Because from the moment I saw you standing there in Copper Creek, head high despite everything they'd done to you, I knew you were someone worth knowing. His voice dropped lower. Someone worth saving. Is that all? She asked softly. Austin met her eyes then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. No, he admitted. That's not all. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Josephine was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the way the firelight played across his features, softening the hard planes of his face. Josephine, he began, his voice rough with emotion. But whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by a loud crack of thunder that shook the cabin, followed by the sound of something heavy falling nearby. Austin was on his feet in an instant, hand on his revolver. Stay here, he ordered, moving cautiously to the door. He peered out into the storm, then cursed under his breath. Lightning hit a tree right next to the cabin. Part of it's fallen on the roof. As if to confirm his words, water began to drip through the ceiling in the corner farthest from the fire. Austin grabbed a pot from his pack and positioned it to catch the drips. Will the roof hold? Josephine asked anxiously. Probably, he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. We'll just have to stay by the fire, away from that corner. The storm raged on, the thunder and lightning seeming to surround their small shelter. More leaks developed, and soon they had positioned every container they could find to catch the water. The area around the fire remained dry, but it meant they were confined to an even smaller space. Try to get some sleep, Austin suggested, arranging their bedrolls as far from the leaks as possible. I'll keep watch, make sure nothing worse happens. You need rest too, Josephine protested. I'll wake you in a few hours, then you can take a turn, he promised, though they both knew he had no intention of doing so. Josephine lay down, acutely aware of Austin sitting just a few feet away, his back against the wall and his legs stretched toward the fire. Despite the storm and the precarious roof, she felt safe in his presence. As she drifted toward sleep, she wondered again about what he had been about to say before the lightning struck, and whether he would find the courage to say it when the storm passed. She woke sometime in the darkest part of the night to find the storm had subsided to a gentle patter of rain. Austin had fallen asleep sitting up, his head tipped back against the wall, his breathing deep and even. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a soft red glow over the cabin. Quietly, Josephine rose and added more wood to the fire, careful not to wake him. She took the opportunity to study him without his knowing the strong line of his jaw darkened by stubble, the tiny scar near his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Even in sleep there was a watchfulness about him, as though part of him remained alert to potential danger. On impulse, she took the blanket from her bedroll and gently draped it over him. As she did, his eyes opened, instantly alert, his hand moving to his gun before he registered who was standing over him. Sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to wake you. It's all right, he replied, his voice husky with sleep. Is it still raining? Just a little. The worst has passed, I think. He nodded, making no move to remove the blanket she had placed over him. You should go back to sleep. We still have a few hours before dawn. Instead of returning to her bedroll, Josephine sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I'll keep you company for a while. Austin didn't object. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire, listening to the gentle rhythm of the rain on the roof. After a time, he shifted slightly, and his hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers entwining with her smoother ones. The simple touch sent a shiver through Josephine that had nothing to do with the chill in the air. When we reach Laramie, he said quietly, I was thinking I might stay for a while. See if there's work to be had. Josephine's heart quickened at his words. I thought you preferred the open range. I've been thinking it might be time to put down roots, he admitted. Find a place that could be home. Because of Blackburn, she asked. Because it's not safe to go back? Austin turned to look at her, his face half in shadow, half illuminated by the firelight. Because of you, he said simply. The honesty in his voice took her breath away. Austin. You don't have to say anything, he interrupted. I know it's too soon. We've only known each other a week, but I've never met anyone like you, Josephine. Your courage, your kindness, despite everything you've been through, it's extraordinary. Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes. I think you see me as better than I am. No, he said firmly. I see you exactly as you are. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. Josephine leaned into it without thinking, and Austin's breath caught audibly. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In answer, Josephine closed the small distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Austin's hand moved to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. Josephine felt as though something long dormant within her had suddenly awakened, a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the fire beside them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder than before, Austin rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you, he confessed. Even when I was filthy and bedraggled after days in jail, she teased, though her voice trembled slightly. Even then, he assured her, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. You were the bravest thing I'd ever seen, standing there with your head high while those cowards jeered. Josephine closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the intensity of her feelings. Just a week ago, she had been facing a life of degradation and misery. Now she was sitting in a leaky cabin in the wilderness with a man who looked at her as though she were indeed priceless, as he had called her that first day. I'm afraid, she admitted softly. Of what? Of hoping too much, of believing this can be real. Austin tilted her chin up gently, making her meet his gaze. It is real, Josephine. I'm real. What I feel for you is real. And what is that exactly? She asked, needing to hear him say it. He smiled then, a true smile that transformed his face. I think I'm falling in love with you, he said. No, I know I am, and it terrifies me almost as much as it thrills me. Josephine laughed softly, joy bubbling up inside her. I feel the same way. He kissed her again, more confidently this time, his arms wrapping around her to pull her closer. Josephine melted against him, feeling truly safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. They talked until dawn, sharing hopes and fears, making tentative plans for a future neither of them had imagined possible a week earlier. When the first light of day filtered through the cabin's single window, they reluctantly prepared to continue their journey, though something fundamental had shifted between them. As they rode away from the cabin, side by side under a clearing sky, Josephine felt a sense of possibility she had thought lost forever in that dusty street in Copper Creek. Whatever came next, she would face it with Austin beside her, and that knowledge made her stronger than she had ever been. They reached Laramie late the following afternoon, the town appearing suddenly as they descended from the foothills into the broad valley. It was larger than Copper Creek, with proper streets laid out in a grid, substantial buildings of brick and stone mixed with the more common wooden structures of the frontier. Austin led the way to a modest house on the outskirts of town, where a tall man with graying hair and a sheriff's badge was just stepping onto the porch. He squinted at them for a moment, then broke into a wide grin. "Hayes, you old war dog," he called, striding forward to meet them. "What brings you to my jurisdiction? Not in trouble, I hope?" Austin dismounted, clasping the man's hand warmly. "Daniel, good to see you. And trouble seems to follow me these days, I'm afraid." Daniel's gaze shifted to Josephine, his expression curious but not unfriendly. "And who's this?" "Josephine Lee," Austin replied, helping her down from Thunder's back. "Josephine, this is Sheriff Daniel Morgan, the finest lawman in Wyoming Territory and a passable shot when he's sober." Daniel chuckled, tipping his hat to Josephine. "Ignore him. Miss Lee, I'm an excellent shot even when I'm not sober. Welcome to Laramie." His easy manner put Josephine at ease immediately. "Thank you, Sheriff Morgan." "Daniel, please," he insisted. "Any friend of Hayes is a friend of mine." He glanced between them, noting their travel-worn appearance. "You both look like you could use a hot meal and a real bed. Come inside, Sarah will be delighted to have guests." Sarah Morgan proved to be a warm-hearted woman with laughing eyes who embraced Josephine as though they were long-lost friends rather than strangers. She shooed them all into the dining room, insisting they sit while she brought out a meal that had Josephine's mouth watering at the sight roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from her garden. Over dinner, Austin explained their situation, recounting the events in Copper Creek and their journey to Laramie. Daniel listened gravely, his jovial manner replaced by professional concern. "Blackburn," he mused when Austin had finished. "The name's familiar. There was a banker by that name involved in some land fraud cases over in Utah Territory a few years back. Never proven, but the rumors were persistent." "Sounds like the same man," Austin agreed. "He's been expanding his operations across Colorado Territory for the past few years, using similar tactics. And now he has a personal grudge against both of you," Daniel concluded. "That complicates matters." Sarah reached over to squeeze Josephine's hand reassuringly. "You're safe here, dear. No one harms anyone under our roof." "Thank you," Josephine said, genuinely touched by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, though." "Nonsense," Sarah declared. "Daniel's been handling trouble since before you were born, haven't you, love?" The sheriff smiled affectionately at his wife. "It's part of the job, and a Hayes here has pulled me out of enough scrapes over the years I owe him more than a little hospitality." After dinner, while Sarah showed Josephine to a small but comfortable guest room, the men remained at the table, discussing options and strategies. By the time they rejoined the women in the parlor, they had formulated a plan. "You'll stay with us for now," Daniel told Josephine. "I'll put out some inquiries about Blackburn, see if there are any warrants on him in other territories that might be useful. In the meantime, Sarah has already decided you're going to help her with her sewing circle." Sarah beamed. "We meet 3 times a week to work on quilts and other projects. It's a perfect way to introduce you to the ladies of Laramie and potential customers for when you open your own shop." "A shop?" Josephine looked at Austin, who shrugged with a small smile. "I might have mentioned your skills and ambitions," he admitted. "There's a vacant storefront on Main Street that would be perfect," Sarah continued enthusiastically. "It was a millinery shop until Mrs. Benson moved back east to be with her daughter. It already has shelves and a counter, and there's living quarters in the back." Josephine felt overwhelmed by the speed with which her future was taking shape. "I don't have the money for something like that," she protested. "We'll figure that out," Austin said confidently. "There's plenty of work for me here." Daniel mentioned the Double R Ranch is looking for someone to help train their horses, and the stage line needs drivers. "And you'll have customers before you know it," Sarah added. "Half the women in town are desperate for someone who can make a decent dress without having to order from a catalog and wait months for it to arrive." Josephine looked around at these 3 virtual strangers a day ago who were now planning her future with more optimism than she had felt in years. "I don't know what to say, except thank you." "Say you'll join the sewing circle tomorrow," Sarah suggested with a wink. "That's thanks enough for me." Later, when Austin walked Josephine to her room, they paused in the hallway, reluctant to part after so many nights spent near each other under the stars. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "It's a lot to take in." Josephine nodded, feeling simultaneously exhausted and elated. "Your friends are wonderful." "They are," he agreed. "But I was asking about you. About us." She met his gaze steadily. "I meant what I said in the cabin, Austin. I'm falling in love with you too. That hasn't changed." The relief on his face was almost comical. "Good. Because I was thinking, Once you're settled and safe, maybe we could, that is, if you wanted. Josephine couldn't help but smile at his sudden awkwardness. Are you trying to court me properly, Mr. Hayes? I am, he said, regaining his composure, though I admit our circumstances so far have been anything but proper. I would like that very much, she told him, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. Good night, Austin. Good night, Josephine, he murmured, his eyes following her as she disappeared into her room. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to her word, Sarah introduced Josephine to the ladies of Laramie through the sewing circle, where her skilled needlework and eye for design quickly earned her admiration. Word spread, and soon she was taking small commissions, altering dresses, making children's clothes, and even creating a wedding gown for the daughter of the town's most prominent merchant. Austin, meanwhile, divided his time between working at the Double R Ranch and helping to renovate the former millinery shop on Main Street. Daniel had arranged a reasonable lease with the building's owner, and Austin had insisted on providing the initial funds for inventory and equipment, despite Josephine's protests. Consider it a business loan, he told her firmly. You can repay me when you're making a profit, with interest if it makes you feel better. Their courtship progressed alongside their practical arrangements, with Austin calling on Josephine properly at the Morgans' home, bringing flowers and taking her for walks through town. On Sundays, they attended church together, then enjoyed picnic lunches by the river when the weather permitted. In the evenings, they often sat on the Morgans' porch, talking about their days and their growing plans for the future. 3 weeks after their arrival in Laramie, Daniel received a telegram that changed everything. He sought out Austin at the ranch, where he was working with a particularly stubborn Mustang in the corral. Got some news, Daniel called, leaning on the fence as Austin dismounted. Blackburn's been arrested in Denver. Austin's head snapped up. For what? Bank fraud to start with, Daniel replied with grim satisfaction. Seems he was skimming from his own bank, using the money to fund his land-grabbing schemes. When things got hot in Copper Creek after you two left, he tried to withdraw a large sum to flee. The bank examiner happened to be there that day and noticed discrepancies in the accounts. What about the false charges against Josephine? All dropped, Daniel confirmed. Several other women have come forward with similar stories about being falsely accused after rejecting his advances. The federal marshal I contacted thinks Blackburn will be spending the next decade or more in prison. Austin let out a long breath. Tension he hadn't realized he was still carrying draining from his shoulders. Josephine needs to hear this. They found her at the shop, which was rapidly taking shape with new paint, clean windows, and shelves being stocked with fabrics, threads, and notions. When Daniel shared the news, she sat down hard on a newly arrived chair, her face pale. It's over? She asked disbelievingly. Just like that? Just like that, Daniel confirmed. You're free to go anywhere you want without looking over your shoulder, though I hope you'll still choose to stay in Laramie. Josephine looked around at the shop, her shop then at Austin, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. This is home now. The relief on Austin's face was immediate and profound. Daniel, noting the look that passed between them, made his excuses and left them alone. I was afraid, Austin admitted once they were alone, that once the threat was gone, you might want to return to Colorado or go somewhere else entirely. Josephine crossed the room to stand before him, taking his hands in hers. Austin Hayes, do you really think I stayed in Laramie because I was hiding from Blackburn? He looked down at their joined hands. It would be understandable if that were part of it. The only reason I'm here, she said clearly, is standing right in front of me. You gave me back my freedom, my dignity, and my hope for the future. But more than that, you gave me your heart, and I've given you mine in return. Where else would I possibly want to be? Austin's smile was slow and wondering, as though he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Josephine Lee, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I never thought I'd find a home again after the war, but home isn't a place, it's a feeling. And when I'm with you, I'm home. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. I was going to wait until your shop was open, until we were sure about Blackburn, but I don't want to wait anymore." Josephine's breath caught as he opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold ring with a small diamond into his palm. "It was my mother's," he explained, "the one thing of value I kept when I sold everything else. I've been carrying it all these years, waiting for, well, for you, though I didn't know it." He sank to one knee on the newly swept floor of her shop, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows to gild his hair. "Josephine Lee, will you marry me? Will you make a home with me wherever life takes us?" Tears blurred Josephine's vision as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Austin, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and hope he had carried since that day in Copper Creek when he had first seen her, head high despite her circumstances, refusing to be broken. "It fits perfectly," she murmured when they parted, admiring the way the diamond caught the light. "Like you in my life," he replied, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. They were married 2 weeks later in Laramie's small church, with Daniel serving as best man and Sarah as matron of honor. The entire town seemed to turn out for the occasion, curious about the newcomers who had so quickly become part of their community. Josephine wore a dress of ivory silk that she had worked on in secret during evenings at the Morgans, its simple lines and delicate embroidery showcasing her skill. Austin, unaccustomed to formal attire, nevertheless cut a striking figure in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. "Nervous?" Daniel asked as they waited at the altar for the bride to appear. Austin shook his head. "Not about marrying her. Never about that." The sheriff chuckled. "Good answer. Sarah and I have been married 15 years, and it's the best decision I ever made." Then the small organ began to play, and all conversation ceased as Josephine appeared in the doorway, illuminated by the afternoon sun streaming through the stained glass windows. Austin felt his heart stop, then race as she walked toward him, her eyes never leaving his. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their voices clear and sure as they exchanged vows to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Austin kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of more than one witness. The celebration afterward was held in the town hall, with food contributed by nearly every household in Laramie. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts, but through it all, Austin and Josephine remained in their own world, hands clasped, exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their feelings for each other. As the evening drew to a close, they slipped away to the rooms above Josephine's shop, which Austin had been secretly furnishing over the past weeks. When he carried her across the threshold, she gasped in delight at the sight of the cozy sitting room with its comfortable chairs, bright curtains, and shelves already filled with books, both his collection and new volumes he had ordered especially for her. "It's perfect," she breathed, taking in the details that showed how well he knew her already. The sewing table positioned to catch the best light from the windows, the colorful quilt on the bed in the adjoining room, the small vase of wildflowers on the table. "I wanted it to feel like home," Austin said, setting her gently on her feet. "Our home." "It does," she assured him, reaching up to loosen his tie. "But home is wherever you are, Austin. You taught me that." His hands came to rest on her waist, drawing her closer. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Mrs. Hayes?" Josephine smiled, her heart full to bursting with happiness. "You have, but I wouldn't mind hearing it again." "I love you," he murmured, bending to kiss her neck, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her fingers tangling in his hair as his lips found hers. "My hero, my heart, my home." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, bearing silent witness to the love that had blossomed against all odds in the wild heart of Wyoming territory, a love born in the dust and desperation of a frontier auction, nurtured on the long trail north and now finally flowering in the sanctuary they had created together. In the years that followed, Josephine's Dress Emporium became one of the most successful businesses in Laramie. Women came from miles around to commission her work, drawn by her reputation for quality and her innate understanding of what suited each customer. Austin continued working with horses, eventually starting his own breeding operation with a herd of Mustangs he gentled, using methods that respected their wild spirits. They built a small house on the outskirts of town, with room for Austin's horses and Josephine's growing garden. 2 years after their wedding, they welcomed a daughter whom they named Emma after Austin's mother. She grew into a spirited child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's quick smile, equally at home on horseback or helping in the shop. As Laramie grew with the expanding railroad and the cattle industry, so did the Hayes family and their place in the community. Austin was eventually persuaded to serve on the town council, where his education and frontier experience proved valuable in navigating the challenges of a growing settlement. Josephine founded a school for young women to learn practical skills like sewing, cooking, and bookkeeping, determined to help others achieve the independence she had fought so hard to secure. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit on their porch, watching Emma play in the yard while they talked about their day or simply enjoyed each other's company in comfortable silence. Sometimes Austin would take out his harmonica and play the old tunes he had learned from his mother, while Josephine worked on her latest sewing project, or simply closed her eyes and listened, her head resting on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked her one such evening, 10 years to the day since he had first seen her in Copper Creek. Josephine looked up at him, at the face she had come to know better than her own, a little more weathered now, with strands of silver threading through his sandy hair, but still handsome, still dear. "Immeasurably," she replied, reaching up to trace the laugh lines that had deepened around his eyes. "Are you?" "Beyond words," he assured her, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Though sometimes I still can't believe my good fortune." "What fortune is that?" "That I happened to be in Copper Creek that day," he said softly. "That I found the courage to speak up, that you agreed to come with me, that you loved me back." Josephine smiled, remembering the fear and uncertainty of those early days. How far they had come from that moment when he had declared her priceless in front of a jeering crowd. It wasn't chance, she told him with conviction. It was destiny. Austin had never been one for fanciful notions, but as he looked at the life they had built together, the home, the child sleeping inside, the love that had only deepened with each passing year, he found himself inclined to agree. "Destiny or not," he said, drawing her close, "you are still priceless to me, Josephine Hayes, and I would pay any price, travel any distance to be exactly where I am right now." "As would I," she whispered against his lips. "As would I." And as the sun set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in the same colors that had accompanied them on their journey north so many years before, they sealed this renewal of their commitment with a kiss as tender and profound as their first had been. For in a world that had once valued Josephine Lee at mere pennies, Austin Hayes had seen her true worth, had called her priceless, and in doing so had found something beyond Price himself, a love that would endure as long as the wild open skies of the West.